Okay, so all of that being said, the strategy to win the nomination is going to be different than the strategy to win the Electoral College. The strategy to win the nomination focuses on collecting delegates. So the states that are most important are going to be the states that come earliest and the states that have the largest number of delegates. And some of this may be surprising. A common misconception, for example, would be that the Democratic Party, or that Texas is not that important to the Democratic Party. In fact, Texas is usually state number 4 or 5 in the total number of delegates that it sends to the Democratic National Convention. So Texas does have a lot of delegates, and since it is a large state, it is important to the nomination process for the Democratic Party. So now we're going to talk about actually winning the election. To win the election, you have to have a majority of the Electoral College. So these electors are people chosen by each state. States get a number of electors equal to senators plus representatives. It is incorrect to say that the Electoral College is based upon population. Obviously, population is a factor in it. Bigger states get more, but it's not purely population. For example, California has 37 million people under the 2010 census. 37 million people, has 55 electors. That translates roughly around 670,000 people per elector. This can be compared with Alaska, which only has 710,000 people, approximately 3 electoral votes, and that means there's 1 elector for every 237,000 people. So Alaska gets a lot better deal in the Electoral College than California does. And again, the Electoral College is not based wholly on population, and that's because you can't get less than 3 electors. All states except for 2 are going to use what's called winner-take-all to award electoral vote, which means that if you win a plurality of the state's popular vote, and please remember the difference between plurality and majority, if you win a plurality of the state's popular vote, you're going to get all of that state's electoral vote. So a candidate could actually get all of a state's electoral vote when having less than a majority, as long as they had a plurality. This could happen if you have like a third-party candidate or something like that. So the strategy then to win the Electoral College is to focus on what are called swing states. That is to say, states that could go either way. Most states are not swing states. For example, Texas is not a swing state. It's almost assuredly going to vote Republican, so both parties will basically write it off. Republicans won't campaign there because they know they've already won it. Democrats won't campaign there because they know that they've already lost it. The Democratic Party would spend more money in Texas. The popular vote for Democrats in Texas would probably go up, but it's probably not going to be enough to go ahead and get them the most votes, a plurality in Texas, so all that money would effectively have been wasted. Texas, where the Republican Party could also spend more money in Texas, and again, the vote total for the Republicans in Texas would go up for president. However, they can't get any more than what they're already going to get. They're almost assuredly going to carry all of Texas's electoral vote, so in effect that money would be wasted as well. So again, the strategy to win the Electoral College is to focus on those swing states, and they vary a little bit cycle to cycle, but typically there's about 4 or 5, maybe 6 swing states, and in reality those are the states that really pick the president. Everybody else is pretty well taken. So oftentimes people wonder, why don't we eliminate the Electoral College? First off, a good reason to get rid of it is that it's never, ever functioned as intended. The Electoral College was originally intended to be a compromise between big states and small states. The Electoral College, to pick a president, was required to have a majority, although without political parties, and remember there weren't political parties when this thing was designed, without political parties it's very easy to see there'd be 4 or 5 or 6 real candidates for president, and the likelihood of somebody getting a majority in the Electoral College is almost non-existent. So under the provisions of the Constitution, the top 3 candidates would then go to the House of Representatives, and then each state would get 1 vote, not each representative, each state would get 1 vote when picking the president. Which means, in effect, that small states, because there were more small states than large states, small states would pick the winner. It was also assumed that real candidates for president, candidates that stood an actual shot at being president, would come from larger states. So the Electoral College was really designed to be a small state, big state compromise. And again, it never worked as intended because with the emergence of political parties, there's only 2 real candidates and somebody almost always gets a majority in the Electoral College. So the question then becomes, why won't it be eliminated? Number one is that it would require a constitutional amendment. And as mentioned before in other lectures, amending the Constitution is almost impossible. The typical route is 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the states. It's only been done 27 times. There's been a lot of things that people have talked about wanting to change the Constitution, and a lot of it even had popular support, but not enough to get 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states. Another reason why it probably won't happen is that neither party really wants to. The reason why neither party really wants to get rid of the Electoral College is it would tend to increase campaign costs. If you'll recall, I mentioned that with the winner-take-all system, campaigning is focused in the swing states. If you eliminate the Electoral College, now candidates would have to campaign all over the United States, and this would drive up campaign costs exponentially. Furthermore, there is no clear consensus for a replacement. The most obvious replacement would be direct popular vote. Allow the people to vote. Whoever gets the most votes becomes the winner, which is how we elect most other offices. However, the president is a rather unique position. He's really the only person that speaks for everybody in the United States. Do you want a president who doesn't have necessarily a majority of the vote? Perhaps he would only have a plurality. Then that might, maybe you'd require a runoff, which would drive up campaign costs even more. So there's no real clear consensus about what to replace it with. So for these 3 reasons, the likelihood that the Electoral College will be eliminated is slim. And finally, one more reason not to eliminate the Electoral College is tradition. Most people seem to buy into the idea that since we've always done it this way and it's basically always worked, then we probably ought to keep it. Even though twice within the last century, you've seen it select someone who did not have a majority of the popular vote. Okay, and as I just mentioned, the Electoral College doesn't always return the same person that the popular vote does, but the Electoral College does have the legal authority to select the president, not the popular vote. The popular vote is used for purposes of selecting people to the position of presidential elector. Okay, now we're going to take a look at campaign finance. Okay, in the United States, at the federal level, we provide public financing for federal elections for president only. Public financing means we're using taxpayer money to pay for campaigns. At the federal level, we pay for president only. And there's actually 2 different types of money, both pre-convention dollars and post-convention dollars. It is possible that some states for various elections might pay might provide public financing, but this course is only concerned with elections at the federal level. When someone is running for president, they can qualify to have their campaign funded pre-convention, which means before the nomination, provided they meet a certain threshold to determine viability. They have to raise a certain amount of money in, I believe it's 20 or more states, to show that they have some sort of viability. And if that happens, the federal government will match campaign contributions dollar for dollar. Most all candidates who run for president do elect to have pre-convention dollars. They go for that financing. It is obviously it's optional. They don't have to. After the nomination, once you receive the nomination of your party, you can qualify for post-convention dollars. And what happens then is the national government gives you a lump sum of money. They give you this pot of money, and you can spend it more or less any way that you want. That is to say that you can spend it any way you want, provided you follow the rules that are set forth. The biggest rule is that you cannot take money from anybody else. So if you accept those post-convention dollars from the national government, you cannot take money from any other source. Some candidates recently have found this to be very limiting, and they believe that they could raise more money by not taking the post-convention dollars. They thought through their own fundraising efforts or using their own money, they would be able to have access to more funding. So it's a candidate by candidate, election by election choice. There's a difference between hard money and soft money. Hard money is money the candidate gets, the candidate controls. He has direct access to it, goes into his bank account. He has final say as to what happens. This can be distinguished from soft money. Strictly speaking, soft money was money that was given to a political party and spent by a political party on behalf of a candidate. The candidate did not have access to it, did not have control over it, although the money was still spent by the party for the benefit of the candidate. Strictly speaking, soft money was made illegal by the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, more commonly referred to as McCain-Feingold, and has been largely replaced by other forms of money, which has the same effect as soft money, we just don't use that term. Another source of campaign money is going to be political action committees. Political action committees are often organized by special interest groups, and they raise funds and then they give hard money contributions to candidates. Political action committees are limited to a one-time contribution, one time per cycle, per election, contribution to a candidate of $5,000. So for one cycle, they could amount to $10,000 because the primary and the general elections are viewed as separate elections. Also, do not confuse political action committees with, don't confuse PACs with super PACs. They are not the same thing. One way that special interest groups get around the limitations of political action committees only being able to give $5,000 is through a process known as bundling. And what happens is the special interest group goes out and solicits individual contributions from folks, and they, in essence, bundle those contributions together. Imagine, if you will, a special interest group going out and hitting up 20 people to each write a $1,000 check made payable to the candidate of the special that the special interest group likes. The special interest group would then serve as a conduit to go out and collect it. They solicited the checks, they collect the checks, and then they'll oftentimes deliver the checks to the candidate. So the special interest group legally didn't give the candidate a dime. However, the special interest group will receive political credit and influence for their ability to raise that money. A new player in campaign finance is a 527 organization. The 527 organization does not make contributions to candidates, although candidates do benefit from the activities of 527s. 527s will raise money and engage in an activity called issue advocacy. So 527 could raise money and then talk all about how a candidate is a good person or a bad person, and this definitely has an impact on the election. The first notable 527 organization was known as Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, and they raised a bunch of money and took out ads that were highly critical of John Kerry's war record in Vietnam. And that definitely had an impact on the election. The 527 organization didn't give any money to his opponent, but still benefited his opponent by attacking John Kerry. The Supreme Court held that corporations have an unlimited right, have the right to raise unlimited amounts of money to spend in political speech. They're still limited into what they can do in terms of direct aid to campaigns, and Congress has prohibited most of that. But if they don't coordinate with the candidate, they can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money. And this has led to a large influx of money into the federal campaign arena. Another organization that you need to know about is called a super PAC. A super PAC is an entity that can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money in direct advocacy for or against a candidate. The biggest rule there, though, is that you cannot directly coordinate with the campaign. There can be no direct coordination. However, the super PAC could print up signs that are almost identical to the campaign. That's fine. The super PAC could run advertisements that are all almost identical to the campaign using very similar video footage, and that would be fine, provided that there is no direct coordination. So the rules that really limit campaign finance, direct aid to the candidate, are easily circumvented with 527s and super PACs. Let's talk a little bit about congressional elections. A couple vocab terms to know. One is going to be coattails. Coattails typically happen whenever a president is elected. What then happens, what we usually expect to happen, is that congressional candidates of the same party as the president, when he wins, typically have a boost in Congress. So you assume that you might elect a Democratic president to office. We would expect the number of Democrats in Congress to go up. This is because there's a number of people that will show up to vote for president, and that's all they care about, but then are presented with all these other choices on the ballot, and they don't know any of them, but they like the Democratic candidate for president, so they'll vote for that, members of his party as well. The opposite, or the follow-up to presidential coattails, would be midterm elections. Midterm elections happen 2 years after a president is elected. During the midterm election, all 435 members of the House of Representatives are elected, and 1/3 of the Senate is up for election, just like it was 2 years ago with the presidential election. However, what we usually expect to happen during the midterm election is that the president's party will take a hit.